The concept of strategic incompetence, deliberately appearing less capable, intelligent, or threatening than one truly is, has been a hidden force throughout history, shaping outcomes in politics, business, and personal relationships. This counterintuitive approach defies conventional wisdom, where ambition and visible competence are often seen as the surest paths to success. Yet time and again, those who master the art of playing dumb gain advantages that elude their more visibly brilliant counterparts. The strategy isn't about genuine inadequacy or humility. It's a calculated maneuver to exploit the blind spots in human perception, creating opportunities where others encounter resistance. Niccolo Machiavelli, the 16th century political philosopher whose name has become synonymous with cunning strategy, understood this dynamic deeply. While his work is often reduced to ruthless power-seeking, his true insights were far more nuanced. Among his most potent observations was the advantage of being underestimated. He recognized that people don't fear or obstruct what they perceive as harmless. This principle extends beyond politics into everyday life, where the ability to appear unthreatening can open doors that demonstrations of brilliance might slam shut. Modern psychology confirms this. Humans consistently overvalue visible competence and underestimate those who seem ineffective, creating an exploitable gap for those willing to temporarily sacrifice ego for long-term gain. History is filled with examples of individuals who leveraged this strategy to remarkable effect. Emperor Claudius of Rome, born with physical disabilities that led his family to dismiss him as mentally deficient, leaned into this perception. While more overtly ambitious figures around him were eliminated during the tumultuous reigns of Caligula and Tiberius, Claudius survived by playing the fool. When he eventually ascended to the throne, he revealed himself as a capable ruler who had been quietly studying governance all along. Similarly, the Chinese strategist Zhuge Liang, before becoming a legendary figure in the Three Kingdoms period, lived as an eccentric hermit known as the Sleeping Dragon. His apparent disinterest in power allowed him to observe political dynamics without interference, positioning him to become one of history's most revered tacticians. Abraham Lincoln, often underestimated due to his humble origins and folksy demeanor, strategically emphasized these traits to disarm opponents. Japanese industrialist Konosuke Matsushita would ask seemingly naive questions in meetings, drawing out information that others would have withheld from someone they perceived as a threat. Even Warren Buffett, with his deliberate simplicity and avoidance of complex financial jargon, benefits from being underestimated despite his unparalleled investment success. These figures understood a fundamental truth. Visible power attracts visible resistance, while perceived incompetence creates operational freedom. The psychological foundations of this strategy are deeply rooted in how humans assess and respond to others. One key bias is competence attribution, our tendency to make swift, often irreversible judgments about someone's abilities based on limited information. Once labeled as incompetent, a person's actions are interpreted through that lens, making it difficult for observers to update their assessment even in the face of contradictory evidence. Machiavelli noted this when he wrote, "Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see, but few can feel. People trust their initial impressions over deeper investigation, making the mask of incompetence a surprisingly durable tool." Another critical factor is threat prioritization. Humans instinctively focus their defensive energy on the most visible threats, often overlooking what appears harmless. This isn't carelessness, but an evolutionary efficiency, allocating limited resources to obvious dangers. However, it creates a vulnerability to threats disguised as harmlessness. Insecure leaders, for example, often surround themselves with visibly incompetent subordinates to appear superior by comparison. This environment allows genuinely capable individuals to operate undetected, gathering information and influence, while others dismiss them as irrelevant. Informational asymmetry is another advantage. When others believe you're less capable, they reveal more than they would to someone they perceive as a rival. This one-way flow of intelligence accumulates over time, creating opportunities for strategic intervention. The person playing dumb gains access to unfiltered insights while revealing little in return, building an advantage that can be deployed at the optimal moment. This dynamic is evident in negotiation contexts, where appearing uninformed can lead to better terms as the other party, believing they hold the upper hand, may offer concessions they'd withhold from a perceived equal. In corporate environments, strategic incompetence offers several advantages. High performers often fall into the responsibility-authority gap, where they're given increasing workloads without corresponding control, leading to burnout. The seemingly average employee avoids this trap, receiving tasks aligned with their perceived capabilities. They also evade the tall poppy syndrome, where standout individuals are cut down by colleagues or superiors, threatened by their rise. By flying under the radar, the strategic player avoids becoming a target while quietly building real competence. Leadership scenarios also benefit from this approach. A leader who occasionally feigns ignorance in specific areas forces team members to develop their own solutions, fostering independence and resilience. This contrasts with the micromanager who stifles growth by insisting on handling everything. The strategic leader preserves their energy for critical decisions while empowering their team, creating a more dynamic and capable organization. Personal relationships, too, can be navigated more effectively with selective incompetence. The partner who can't cook or manage finances may avoid being saddled with those responsibilities, creating a more balanced division of labor based on genuine preference rather than imposed expectation. While this can veer into manipulation, it also reflects a pragmatic understanding of how expectations are formed and managed. However, the strategy carries significant risks. Discovery is the most immediate danger. When others realize they've been deceived, the backlash can be severe, eroding trust and creating lasting enemies. The psychological toll of maintaining a false persona is another concern. Constantly performing incompetence requires mental energy that could otherwise be directed toward genuine growth. Over time, the act may become internalized, leading to actual decline in capability. What begins as a tactic can morph into reality. Ethically, the approach exists in a gray area. Deliberate deception conflicts with values of authenticity and honesty. Yet, in competitive environments where full transparency can be exploited, strategic understatement may be a necessary defense. The most ethical practitioners avoid active deception, instead, choosing not to showcase their full capabilities unnecessarily. They let their work speak for itself when it matters most, avoiding the traps of constant self-promotion. The paradox at the heart of this strategy is that the direct pursuit of power often invites resistance that limits its attainment, while the concealment of capability allows it to grow unhindered. This challenges the conventional belief that recognition follows demonstration, that showing your worth guarantees reward. Instead, strategic restraint creates space for development free from the constraints of others' expectations. Mastering. This approach demands more than just tactical restraint. It requires a fundamental shift in how one perceives and engages with power dynamics. The sacrifice of short-term ego gratification is not merely an act of patience, but a deliberate investment in long-term effectiveness. It is the understanding that true influence is not seized in bold, attention-grabbing displays, but cultivated quietly, often in the shadows where scrutiny is minimal and resistance is low. To endure being underestimated, to willingly occupy a space where others dismiss you as unremarkable, requires a rare kind of confidence. It is the quiet assurance that one's abilities are not diminished by others' misperceptions, but rather preserved and sharpened for the moment when they will matter most. The most sophisticated practitioners of this strategy are not content with mere deception. They operate on a higher level of strategic awareness. They recognize that playing dumb is not an end in itself, but a means to an end, a temporary posture that creates space for observation, learning, and positioning. They do not linger indefinitely in the role of the unassuming underdog, nor do they reveal their hand prematurely. Instead, they bide their time, gathering intelligence, building alliances, and waiting for the precise moment when their capabilities will have the greatest impact. This is not passivity, but a form of controlled restraint, akin to a chess player who sacrifices a pawn not out of weakness, but to set the stage for a decisive checkmate. What separates these individuals from the merely cunning is their understanding of power as a fluid, dynamic force. They know that visible strength often invites challenge, while perceived weakness disarms it. They grasp that influence is not just about what you project, but about what you withhold. The unspoken leverage, the hidden advantage, the unexpected move that others never see coming. This is why the greatest strategists in history, from Sun Tzu to Machiavelli, emphasize the importance of deception, misdirection, and the art of appearing harmless until the moment of action arrives. Beyond its tactical utility, this approach exposes deeper truths about human nature and the illusions of social hierarchy. In a world where perception often trumps reality, where status is frequently awarded to those who perform competence rather than embody it, the ability to manipulate these perceptions becomes a form of power in itself. People are conditioned to respond to signals, confidence, assertiveness, visibility, but they are far less equipped to recognize the quiet accumulation of influence by those who avoid such signals altogether. The individual who masters this dynamic learns to exploit the gap between appearance and reality, turning others' biases and assumptions against them. This is why the strategy of playing dumb is not just a tool for the ambitious, but a lens through which to understand the mechanics of power itself. It reveals that success is not always a function of raw ability or relentless self-promotion, but of timing, positioning, and the disciplined management of others' expectations. The brightest light in the room may command attention, but it also casts shadows. Shadows where the truly strategic can operate unseen until the opportune moment arrives. Ultimately, the power of playing dumb lies in its defiance of conventional wisdom. It is a reminder that influence is not always seized through force or brilliance, but sometimes through calculated restraint. From the emperors of ancient Rome, who feigned incompetence to survive court intrigue, to the modern executives who downplay their acumen to avoid corporate infighting, those who wield this strategy effectively understand a timeless truth. The most formidable strength is often the one that goes unrecognized until it is too late to counter. In a world where everyone is scrambling to be seen, the real advantage may belong to those who know when and how to stay hidden. The strategy of deliberate underperformance reveals far more than just a clever tactic for personal advancement. It exposes fundamental truths about the nature of power and human psychology. At its core, this approach demonstrates how perception shapes reality in social hierarchies, how people willingly confuse performance with substance, and how the most effective forms of influence often operate in the spaces between what is seen and what is hidden. Human societies have always operated on systems of perception management, where what appears true carries more weight than what actually is true. This phenomenon explains why charismatic but incompetent leaders often rise to power while truly capable individuals remain overlooked. People respond to signals, the projection of confidence, the display of expertise, the performance of authority, but rarely dig deeper to verify whether these signals correspond to reality. The strategic advantage of playing dumb lies in recognizing and exploiting this disconnect. By refusing to play the expected game of self-promotion, the practitioner creates a blind spot in others' perception, a space where real capability can develop unnoticed until the moment of maximum advantage. This dynamic becomes particularly powerful in competitive environments where overt displays of ambition trigger defensive reactions. In corporate settings, for instance, the employee who constantly showcases their achievements may gain short-term recognition, but also creates resentment, rivalry, and heightened expectations. Their every move becomes scrutinized, their mistakes magnified, their successes taken for granted. Meanwhile, the colleague who maintains a posture of modest competence faces none of these pressures. They receive less attention, but more freedom. Freedom to learn, to experiment, to observe the mistakes of others without becoming a target themselves. Over time, this asymmetrical development of capability creates situations where the apparently average performer can deliver exceptional results, precisely when it matters most, catching competitors completely off guard. The psychological mechanisms behind this are deeply rooted in human cognition. Our brains evolved to make quick judgments based on limited information, a necessary adaptation for survival, but one that creates predictable vulnerabilities. Once we categorize someone as unthreatening or unremarkable, we tend to stop updating that assessment unless confronted with overwhelming contradictory evidence. This cognitive inertia gives the strategically incompetent tremendous advantage. Their occasional displays of capability register as pleasant surprises rather than expected performances, creating disproportionate impact. A brilliant insight from someone perceived as average carries more weight than the same insight from a recognized expert because it violates expectations. Moreover, this approach taps into the human tendency to underestimate what doesn't appear threatening. Throughout history, revolutionary ideas and movements have often emerged from sources the establishment dismissed as irrelevant. The scientific community initially ignored Gregor Mendel's work on genetics because he was just a monk puttering in a monastery garden. The music industry dismissed the Beatles as just another boy band until their songwriting genius became undeniable. In each case, the initial underestimation created space for capability to develop beyond the constraints of scrutiny and resistance. The corporate world offers countless examples of this principle in action. Consider how Steve Jobs, during his exile from Apple, built Pixar into an animation powerhouse while being largely written off by the tech industry. His eventual triumphant return to Apple was possible precisely because his capabilities had been allowed to develop outside the spotlight of constant scrutiny. Similarly, many successful executives have risen through organizations not by being the most visible high performers, but by being reliable, understated operators who consistently delivered results without drawing excessive attention to themselves. This strategy also provides protection against one of the most insidious dynamics in organizational life, the tall poppy syndrome. Human groups naturally tend to cut down members who rise too visibly above the rest, a phenomenon seen everywhere from corporate offices to academic departments to social circles. The individual who plays dumb avoids triggering this reflexive, leveling mechanism. Their achievements are seen as fortunate accidents rather than threatening demonstrations of superiority, allowing them to accumulate real influence without attracting the jealousy or opposition that typically accompanies success. The benefits extend beyond mere career advancement to the realm of personal development. In a culture that increasingly demands constant self-promotion and visibility, the pressure to perform can actually stunt genuine growth. The social media age has created what some psychologists call performance exhaustion, where people spend so much energy crafting their image that they have little left for actual skill development. The strategic underperformer escapes this trap. Freed from the need to constantly prove themselves, they can focus on substantive learning and capability building. Their development happens in depth rather than in display, creating reserves of competence that can be deployed with precision when most valuable. There's also a profound philosophical dimension to this approach. It represents a rejection of the modern cult of visibility, the idea that worth must be constantly demonstrated and validated through external recognition. In choosing strategic invisibility, the practitioner asserts a deeper form of confidence, one that doesn't require constant reinforcement from others' approval. This psychological independence itself becomes a source of power, as it makes the individual less vulnerable to manipulation through praise or criticism. The historical record shows that this strategy has been particularly valuable in times of political turmoil. Those who survived the treacherous courts of medieval Europe or the shifting alliances of revolutionary periods were often those who mastered the art of appearing harmless. The 18th century French statesman Talleyrand, who served under multiple regimes from Louis XVI to Napoleon to the restored monarchy, exemplified this ability. By never appearing as the primary threat to any faction, he maintained influence across seismic political shifts that destroyed more visible figures. In modern professional contexts, the applications are equally potent. The consultant who occasionally plays dumb in client meetings often elicits more honest information than the one who projects omniscience. The manager who feigns ignorance about certain technical details empowers team members to develop their own problem-solving skills. The TRF entrepreneur who underpromises and overdelivers builds more sustainable relationships than the constant self-promoter. However, this approach demands more than just tactical deception. Its most effective practitioners develop what might be called strategic patience, the ability to delay gratification and recognition in service of larger objectives. They understand that true influence compounds quietly, that the most durable forms of power are often those that develop beneath notice. This requires resisting the natural human impulse for immediate validation, a discipline that runs counter to much of modern culture's emphasis on instant results and constant visibility. The digital age has made this strategy both more challenging and more valuable. In an era of personal branding and constant self-documentation, the ability to maintain strategic reserves of unpublicized capability becomes rare, and therefore more powerful. While others exhaust themselves in the performative aspects of their roles, the strategic underperformer conserves energy for substantive work. Where colleagues burn out chasing visible markers of success, they maintain the stamina for long-term impact. Ultimately, the power of playing dumb lies in its subversion of the fundamental assumptions about how influence is acquired and exercised. It proves that in many contexts, the indirect path proves more effective than the direct one, that apparent weakness can mask real strength, and that sometimes the surest way to gain power is to stop chasing it so visibly. From ancient courts to modern boardrooms, those who have mastered this approach remind us that the most formidable competitors aren't always the ones making the most noise. Sometimes, they're the quiet figures in the background, patiently waiting for their moment, while others exhaust themselves in the spotlight. This isn't to suggest that capability should always be hidden, or that competence should never be demonstrated. Rather, it's about recognizing that the strategic deployment of one's abilities, knowing when to shine and when to remain in shadow, constitutes a higher form of intelligence. In a world where everyone is desperately signaling their worth, real power often belongs to those who understand the value of occasionally staying silent, of sometimes appearing less than they are, and of always keeping their most formidable capabilities in reserve until the moment when they will have maximum impact. The timeless lesson is this: while society rewards the performance of competence, true advantage often lies in the selective revelation of actual competence. Those who internalize this distinction free themselves from the exhausting game of constant self-promotion and position themselves to make moves that others never see coming. In the end, the most effective form of power may be that which is exercised so quietly that its victims never realize what hit them until it's too late to respond.